Welcome everyone to this webinar. I am definitely looking forward to this flowing conversation because we're going to be chatting about the fascinating connection between communication skills, theater, and storytelling techniques. If you're new to our initiative, you should know that communication skills is one of the focus areas of the GiLE Foundation, and we really try to develop that amongst young people specifically. So you might ask why? Why communication skills? Well, as a start, communication is central to the human experience. However, there are still so many people who struggle to get their message across. They struggle to communicate with confidence and clarity. The interesting thing is that the ability to articulate yourself, to articulate your emotions, your thoughts, or even your ideas, it really can be learned. And when it is practiced, it can lead to tremendous benefits, not only in your personal life, but also in your professional career. My name is Craig Johnson, and I am the founder and co-creator of the GiLE Foundation. And right now I'm joined by two guests, Alexis and Vales, both communicators themselves and who also share a common passion for teaching communication. So Alexis Latham, he's the founder of LathamFlow and the director of Scallabouche Theatre. I think I said it right. And since leaving the Welsh College of Music and Drama in 1990, Alexis has worked as an actor, a director, and a trainer all over Europe and the UK. So Alexis, welcome.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Hi, thanks, Craig.
Fantastic. And our only other guest is Valeriano Donzelli. He's a leadership and communication skills coach, a corporate executive at a multinational, and he's also the president of InSpiral Foundation here in Budapest. Vale has over 16 years of experience in leadership and management, and in the last 5 years, he's been teaching and coaching using storytelling and nonviolent communication techniques. So Vale, welcome to you too.
Thanks, Craig. Happy to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. So I think before we begin, I think it's nice if we just paint a clear picture so the audience knows more or less what to expect over the next 45 or 40 minutes or so. Right, so just to give you a high-level framing, I think we're going to attempt to try and diagnose the communication problem, right? And why is it that so many people struggle to communicate? We're then going to try and look at the what we communicate, followed by the how we communicate. Right? So what being the language that we use, the substance, as well as the necessity of what we say. And then the how being how we deliver that message, right? The techniques, whether it's coming from theater practices or from storytelling. So I reckon, guys, please do not hold back. If it would be great to get your questions either in the chat or you could ping them directly to the guests. And it would be better if you could designate them or bring them up in the different themes that we'll be addressing the topic of communication. So yeah, just to kick things off, I reckon we can do a quick round, starting with you, Alexis. Perhaps you can just give your general take on communication and why you enjoy teaching it so much.
Right, well, probably rather than a general take, maybe there's a quote I often use, and I was reminded of it when you just talked about, you know, how liberating it can be if we do know how to communicate ourselves. And it's a quote someone showed me once from Salman Rushdie, the novelist. Well, I must confess, I've always found his books very difficult to get into, but the quote is great. And it says, if you can't retell the stories of your life, then you live in a prison. Someone else owns the story. And I think that's the interesting thing around communication, that, you know, it's a dynamic between you and somebody else. And that's really when we come alive, when we interact with other people, you know, because we're doing something active. You know, that's when people perceive you as a personality. And that, you know, very often in this dynamic, if you are not creating that story and communicating what you're talking about as a story, and it's not coming across as a story, the other person is going to invent the story for themselves. And then that means they probably will invent a different story to the story you're trying to get across about yourself. and then they have a picture of you, and they will keep you in that box, in that picture. And I think that often happens to us in, throughout our lives in institutions. As we go through school, we'll behave in a particular way and we'll communicate ourselves in a particular way, and other people will put together a story about us, which may not be true, but then we can often be trapped in that. And then it's up to us to understand that and to try and get the right story across. So in a way, that's why I enjoy what I do, because it is about giving people skills to liberate themselves to a certain extent and liberate the control of the story that they're saying about themselves.
100%. I also can connect with that liberating aspect and owning your own story. Vale, what's your take? How did you discover your passion for communication skills, and what makes you tick and motivates you to develop that in others?
Hey, Craig, I would just say I find fascinating how communication has evolved over the course of hundreds, thousands of years. And what I think resonates with the audience is we need to acknowledge that communications, and particularly language, is what makes Homo sapiens the species that it is today, what makes us, quote unquote, dominate the planet. And we can talk about that, whether it's good or bad, what we're doing to the planet. But reality is that our ability as Homo sapiens to cooperate stems from our ability to use language in an efficient way. And what motivates me is to see how we somewhat deviated from the original purpose of communication, which was to transfer information quickly. That's how we as Homo sapiens could thrive and pretty much survive a lot of different challenges and always developed in our environment. We could really transform our environment in ways that no other species is able to. And it's really going back to the idea of how do we transfer information efficiently. And the other aspect I would like to highlight to begin with is that communications, it's not only a set of techniques. It's really the mirror of your soul. It's the mirror of your inner narrative. So the way you communicate externally oftentimes is just a reflection of what's going on within you. And I'm always pointing to the inner narrative that we have, because I observe that when we are able to change the way we think, we're also able to change the way we speak, and vice versa. So it can be a virtuous circle if we acknowledge where we can do better as communicators, either by changing the way we describe the world to ourselves and the way we communicate externally. So that can be a vicious and a virtuous circle, depending on the way you look at it.
Yeah, and I appreciate you going all the way back to the dark ages or cave time. We recognize the importance of communication. We recognize the importance of owning your story, but we still live at a time when there's just so much miscommunication, a lot of communication breakdowns. And I would like your take, both of you, as to why is that? How do you diagnose this issue that a lot of people are facing, not just young people, but the whole world? We can start with you, Alexis, and then we can get Vale's opinion.
Yeah, I think one of the, this is, I'll go to one thing that I often start with in a training, is that how important it is to be congruent. Because, so if I give you two examples, so if I'm creating a theatre piece, it's very important that that person who sits on stage and looks at somebody else and says, "I love you," doesn't say it in a really well communicated way. So if I break that down, so communication, I think very often in a public situation where we want to get a message across, it has to be congruent, it has to be well matched. So, the words have to be aligned with the body language and the tone of voice. And when it's all matched, we tend to listen to what is being said, and we tend to pick up on what is being said. When it's not matched, that's when we start looking for why. What's the story behind what's being said? And that is when we start to misinterpret and miscommunicate and misunderstand. And actually, that's a very natural thing for us, because that's, we are all natural storytellers. And that's why an audience, if they see two people on stage and one of them is looking at the other person, you know, they say, I really love you. The audience knows there's a problem there because it's not said with any feeling tones, and the audience starts to want to know why, what's going on there, what's the story, and they engage imaginatively in what's not happening. And that's exactly what you don't want to happen, let's say, in public communication, when you want to have successful messaging between people. So for me, it's all about matching. And if it's not matched, and it's interesting that I think that, you know, I think there's always two ways, you know, the body plays, I think, a huge role in that, much more than we give, you know, we give it credit for. Because the body will influence the mindset of the person who is talking in a very strong way. And it'll also influence the way the message is perceived by the person who's listening to it.
Yeah, fantastic. And yourself, Vale, we've heard about the misalignment and being actually the cause of the communication breakdowns. We'll probably get into that flow when we discuss the techniques as to how to achieve this flow in communication. And I imagine a lot of you have a lot of similarities in how you view communication. But I'm curious, Vale, what is your take? Do you also see it as only a misalignment, or do you think there's something more going on when it comes to a breakdown of communication?
I'm gonna give a couple of thoughts on this theme. The first one is, I think, a bit of biology, meaning, again, we as Homo sapiens have developed a lot in terms of what we achieve in terms of technology and innovation and science, if you will. But our brain is pretty much the same as it was 200,000 years ago. And our brain has developed to survive in a pretty much different environment. And there is a natural tendency for us to respond with stress and to look for threats, right? So because of survival reasons, we are very prone to see issues, problems, and threats everywhere. So this is one element that is reflected a lot in the way we communicate and the way we respond. For example, if someone is raising their tone, immediately you will feel threatened, you will feel attacked, and your whole system will react as if you're actually attacked, although on the physical level you are not. So this is one element which I think is still part of the way we interact and we communicate, and I think it's important to address and to be conscious of. The other one is more historical and relates to the fact that one of the main inflection point in the history of human beings is about 10,000 years ago, when we started to when we became agricultural, right? So when agriculture came into the picture, an entirely new world took place, which is really about this sense of property, right? This is my field, this is my crop, and whatever it's, part of this is mine and the rest is yours. Or if you don't have anything, well, it's your problem. So this idea of possession also then continued and created kingdoms and created lands and created capitalism. So there has been progress in that sense, which again has brought a lot of advantages to society, but also a number of sort of issues, if you will, and challenges. One of those is that this post-agriculture, we have developed this sense of hierarchy, right, and domination. A few people, the king, the emperor, the pope, you name it, had power over thousands, millions of people. So even in the corporate world today, but also in most of the institutions, there is a sense of hierarchy, or what we may call a power distance. I think that's an element which we see a lot in the way we communicate. So there is a sense of distance between certain roles within a corporation or within an institution, and that's reflected in the language. Also, if you think about the warfare, like there are a lot of expressions that we're taking from war. We use a lot the verb to fight as a metaphor, and I find that sort of that verb itself is triggering a number of thoughts and a number of ideas in the collective consciousness which are really negative. You don't have to fight when you are playing a sport, right? Because if ultimately you are trying to enjoy, and that's not a fight, that's a play, right? When you are in the business world, you're not fighting the competitors, you're trying to do a better product. It doesn't have to be a fight, but we use this a lot. It's just an example. I can give you many others, but I think, combination of these two, sort of the biological aspect, our tendency to see the negative, to see what's risky, the attack, and the other one is more historical, this hierarchical way of looking at the world. I think it creates a lot of challenges for us today.
Could I just add to that? Because I think from the storytelling perspective, it's a very interesting thing, because one of the there's an interesting neuroscientist called Tali Sharrow, who's done quite a lot of work on, that's her phrase, we're all natural storytellers, and that the brain is wired for story. And one of her things is optimism. And it's very interesting that, if you're going to tell, even if you look at films, most films will probably start with something fairly nice, fairly positive, because it's very important to engage people into some kind of optimistic feeling that they begin to care about before you bring in the challenge that has to be resolved. And I think that's the other thing about, the miscommunication, is the order that we deliver our ideas. I know, so very often, let's say you're a consultant, and you've been asked to look at something and go back to the client and deliver. And the consultant's very aware that the client wants solutions. So they go piling in and say, right, we've got 4 key solutions. It's you try this, this, and this, and this. Because they think that that's what the client wants. And of course, the client's there waiting for the solutions. But when you do that out of context, they have no value. You have to remind people all the time of the emotional context to build up the value, to be ready to listen to things. Otherwise, the idea that you put on the table may not resonate with the person, and then they're left there going, well, God, we paid all that money and you just come up with this idea. And a lot of it is, it's not about overselling something, it's just placing things in the emotional context for people so that it resonates with them, it reminds them why it's important that they should care about it, and it triggers their imagination in the right way. I think this, the way that we decide to shape and form ourselves, and the way we decide to shape and form the ideas that we deliver, these are really the 2 sets of choices that give people freedom to communicate, well or badly.
Right, and I'm actually, without assuming anything, you guys do a lot of training workshops, right? So a lot of people come to you to improve their communication. So is it because there's a lack of congruence, because they don't know how to create this emotional context that you've just mentioned, Alexis, or is it because of the history, and is there anything beyond what you guys have said where people actually struggle with certain aspects of communication?
I can go next, if that's okay, Craig. And connect to my previous point. What I'm observing is that most people struggle because they tend to formulate their thoughts in terms of judgments. And again, they oftentimes focus on what's wrong. And it can be what's wrong in others, what's wrong in the world, in the situation they're facing, or what's wrong with themselves. They can be self-critical, but really it's the focus on judgments versus focus on solutions and needs. And this, prompts me to speak about nonviolent communication, and probably will do it later. But really the idea of thinking of a problem in terms of, oh, this is wrong, this is bad, I'm a failure, or that person is stupid, or he doesn't understand, is an idiot. And when you think that way, you think about the wrongness. That doesn't necessarily help you find concrete paths to solutions. So what I'm trying to do with people is making them aware of that negative judgment they have of the situation, and help them, I use the same word that Alexis used earlier, like liberation from this, burdening idea of, okay, that the situation is wrong, this person is having bad intentions, and really focus on, what's going on within you, how do you feel about it, what are your needs, that from that level of self-awareness, you can actually develop strategies. And the other item I would add, and it connects to the word strategy, is that people think they already have the solution. People think that there is only one way to solve problems, and many times their view is very limited because that's probably the way they have seen from others, or their family or education system told them is the way to do it. But in reality, when you are going deeper, understand the basic need that is behind that strategy, you have much more opportunities to solve that problem versus having already predefined way of solving that problem. And I see that a lot in the world of finding a new job, and people think they need to work for a given company or a given sector to feel fulfilled. But when you go down a couple of levels, what they actually need is a sense of belonging, is some flexibility in their work arrangement, is the opportunity to grow. And when you look at those needs, there are so many opportunities to find fulfillment for those needs.
Right. It definitely seems like there's a broad range of aspects that lead to communication breakdowns. And I take your point with the sense of belonging and having meaning in what you're doing, which does facilitate that relationship building, the listening, which is the other part of communication, right? There's a sender and then there's a receiver. And that also sometimes is not in alignment or not in the common sort of frequency. But I actually just want to move on with the conversation from the diagnosis, which I think we nicely unpacked. And I actually want to talk about the what we communicate, right? So Alexis, this next part is I want to direct to you. So you being in theater, you know, they talk about theater being the dramatic art of communication. And my take is that we live in a world where a lot more people are being desensitized. You know, everything is exaggerated. We are overwhelmed with information. But I actually wonder, is there firstly such a thing as over communicating? And how do you actually find a balance between dramatic communication as you know it and over communicating? I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
I'm not, well, okay, let me, there was an interesting sociologist called Irving Goffman. And Goffman wrote a book I think back in the 1950s called The Presentation of Self in the Modern World. And so I don't know if any of you watched the series Mindhunter on Netflix. It's a very interesting one about how they first started to look at, you know, catching serial killers and creating this concept of doing a psychometric profile of a serial killer and then going out and finding them. And Goffman actually creeps into that story, not as a person, but his philosophy. And I'll bring it around because I think actually what you're asking me now does connect going back a little bit, because what Goffman's perception was that we are all actors. So, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're on stage or not on stage. We're all playing a role, and we're all doing it right now. I mean, ourselves, we're playing a particular role that we think will, you know, engender us and will make us successful with what we're trying to achieve. And he put it into the home, and he said, you know, like the kitchen is like the green room. The sitting room is like where you're on stage because you've created it yourself. You invite people in. And actually Goffman's big thing is he said it would be a nightmare if we ever end up having open plan offices, because then everybody will feel they're on show. And that's where we've got to today. And it'll be a real problem for us. And actually, that's a big problem with this virtual communication, why a lot of people really struggle, because they feel they're on show all the time. And they're having to generate this character that they're not used to doing sort of 8 hours a day. Well, I think I might have got myself a bit lost there, so which is showing you what the problem with communication is, over communication. Yeah, dramatic or over communication. So it comes back to that. And I think that whenever you see, so I think that, you know, that's one of the issues that we often have, is that when we're stressed, that is when we will over communicate, probably, and it will become too dramatic. Now, that may be that, you know, our role, you know, we may go to a more submissive role, but it will still be too dramatic for the scenario. We may go for a more aggressive role and it'll be over dramatic. But generally, it is when we're stressed and we're challenged by the situation, the people we're in front of, by the other person we're dealing with can often be a stress for us, or that the importance of what we're trying to achieve is just too important for us, so it's overstressed us. And then we tend to, I think people have default roles that they fall into, that they think will help them, and they use that to protect themselves, and then it becomes too strong for us. And we recognize it. We recognize it because there's a mismatch there. It's not normal. It's like if somebody walks into a room and is over dominant and overconfident, a lot of people may look at that person and go, oh, wow, very confident person. But after a while, we'll think, why? Why do they need to do that? What's going on behind that? So I think that's, I'm trying to put together those terms, dramatic, that you talked about. And I think that's when it can become dramatic or maybe even violent, as Vale refers to as well. Because we're stressed and we slip to roles that perhaps aren't often working for us as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a nice segue to bring Vale in with regards to the non-violent communication, right? So we're still chatting about the what we communicate, right? So that gets a lot more exaggerated when we are under stress. But there's another side to communication, which is our language, which Vale already touched on. So maybe Vale, you can explain, what do you mean by non-violent in terms of our communication?
Sure. Nonviolent communication is a framework by a fantastic man called Marshall Rosenberg, who started this journey, I think, in the mid-60s, and unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But his framework developed over time, and it's now widely used in different contexts. So anybody can get the basics of it by just buying the book, but also there are trainings and forums and associations. What we mean by nonviolent is really a communication style that is non-threatening. And it also stems from the understanding that we all have basic needs, and we're all striving to meet those needs. And oftentimes the conflict that seems to arise in communication is because we're not able to acknowledge or understand other people's perspective. And we're going into conversations with the desire to win or to achieve given outcomes, what we actually want to achieve. What nonviolent communication does is really bring you to 4 basic elements of communication that ultimately wants you to be efficient and effective in the way you communicate, right? Is what are your feelings? What are your needs? What are the facts? What are the observations? And what do you want? Like, what are the concrete elements or concrete steps that you want from the other person or from the group, right? What it does, it eliminates, or it asks you to eliminate judgment, right? So you would never say nonviolent communication. You would never start a sentence with "you are incompetent, selfish, stupid," you name it, because that's judgment. It will ask you to focus on an observation. When I see you take all the candies, I feel upset because I have a desire to eat the candy. Right? I have a feeling, I have the need of eating, and my observation is that I see you taking all the candies. This is a typical example. Having a 3-year-old daughter that I use with my daughter. It says nothing about, there's no judgment or assessment or diagnosis about the other person's intentions or being a good or bad, but simply is what I observe, is what I feel about it, and is what I need. And then making a clear request could be like, next time mom buys the candies, can I have at least one? Would you be willing to give me one? See, it's much less threatening than saying, oh, you are so selfish, you ate all the candies.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier said than done, seeing that we are communicating. And I do like how you've sort of articulated that. So the feeling, the need, and the basic non-judgmental observation. But I am curious as to your take, Alexis. How do you practically teach people to work on the what when it comes to when they communicate?
What do you mean by the what exactly? You mean the words themselves?
Yeah, yes, the words themselves, or because we'll get into the how a little bit later, which could include body language. It could include the example that you use where someone is bursting with confident body language. So that will, but I do take it that it's all interlinked. But in terms of the sounds that come out of your mouth, how do you regulate that? Is it just a stress thing? If you manage the stress, then you're sorted?
Yeah, I mean, so perhaps this is probably where it's very interesting, because I was listening there to Vali and I was thinking, gosh, how many times have I encouraged people to use that phrase, you are? Because I think that, when we share our perspective of the other person's position, how we see them, that can be very, very interesting. But I do, words themselves, it's a very interesting, because I think that so much of it is around the body, so actually, if you change, what I tend to do to help people discover the what is to start with the body, first of all, and to look at how they're actually holding themselves and their posture. And then we look at how the huge influence body has over the creation of content and the perception of and the reception of content as well. So it will change everything. I mean, just to go, that classic thing that you make somebody a meal and you say, do you like it? And they go, yeah. Well, those two words, that sound and that word, yeah, if you read it, that's okay. It's interpreted in one way, but if you hear it, it's interpreted with so many different things. So it's making people aware of that, when it comes to the what, you can't really disconnect the words from the way they're said, because there is so much going on there in terms of the creation of the words they're said. So I tend to try and keep it to ideas and the physicality. And then the rest of it is the connection, which should be spontaneous.
Right. And I suppose let's move on then. Let's then dive deeper into the how, seeing that it is quite deeply connected. So then how do you create this flow, right? So a lot of the language you use on your website and probably during your training courses, you talk about creating a flow in communication, right? So that's probably linked to the alignment or congruence. That was the word you used. So how do you practically teach that during your sessions?
I mean, there's different elements to that. I mean, one is the flow that you have with another person, so it depends what kind of flow you're trying to create. I mean, if you're presenting something, you're the person who is, generating most of the content and the sound there, but you still need to engage and have a rapport with other people. And so I think tempo is a very crucial element. And getting, making sure that people understand, people need time to assimilate things. There's a wonderful thing called the 3-second rule that they found out with the brain, that the brain can only take in so much information and then it needs a pause. And it's 3 seconds. And then if you look at, classic songs, if you take a song like Imagine by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, the whole thing is built up in 3-second phrases, and even the words are delivered. And you can even go back into things like Ravel's Bolero, the way that builds up as well. Now, they had no idea about the 3-second rule, but they had a feeling and a sense for it. There is a natural flow of communication. I give something and it's taken, and there's an opportunity for the other person to accept it and register it before I carry on. So that's one element of flow. The other element is around, how you structure your ideas, how you structure yourself. If we are sometimes people can be have a much more fluid delivery when they're being spontaneous. And I suppose also the other thing that I do a lot of work with people is for them to understand that they actually have most of these skills intuitively anyway. So if I said to you, Craig, tell us a story about fire, an anecdote, you would probably have some kind of story in your lifetime that you could put together and quickly tell me a story, a situation that happened to you with fire. And because it's a story and it happened to you, it will have an emotional resonance. Because it's something important for you, you'll be very interested in my reaction, even on a screen, so you have a good tempo. Because it had a story, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you'll create that quite naturally. And you'll use metaphors, you'll use antithesis, and you'll use visual imagery in it quite naturally. So a lot of it is about getting people to understand that and you know, taking them back to how they create that natural storyteller in themselves and create that flow.
Yes, your point was actually what I was going to mention to bring Vale in, because I imagine the tempo is just as important in telling a story. You know, there's that 3-second sort of pause that you mentioned, but I also am fully aware of that dramatic pause to create a build-up in when you deliver a story or when you talking in front of an audience, etc. But I'm curious, Vale, you also are passionate about storytelling, and you've heard Alexis talk about tempo, and all of us being naturally natural storytellers, rather. Maybe you can just give your views on what you've heard so far.
Yeah, I'm gonna start from the perspective of how can we help people, or how can people help themselves really to improve what they communicate and even how they communicate. One of the exercises that I do with people is have them to reflect on the purpose of that particular conversation, be it a business situation, be it a first date, be it a conversation with a family member. And what I want them to acknowledge is what is the purpose and what is the inner energies that they're bringing to the conversation. Because I find that, as I mentioned earlier, that is really determining a lot of what is going to happen in that conversation. As an example, if you are going into a conversation with a customer or with a supplier where your only purpose is to, you know, squeeze some price reduction out of your supplier, or you are going for a price increase to your customer, and that's your only purpose, your energies will be such that we can call win-lose. You're going there to win, and you don't really care too much of what the other person or your partner wants. That's called win-lose, right? While if you, and that's the next sort of level of the exercise, understand your purpose, understanding the energy that you're bringing to the conversation. And then I ask my clients to, can you please describe what are your needs at the more basic level, and then I ask them to think what can be or might be the needs of the person, right? So when the person goes down to the need and says, okay, my goal is to reduce the cost or increase my revenue, that's already a one level lower than increasing the price or decreasing the cost of, you know, the supplier in the example I gave. So, and then I said, okay, what do you think is the need of your partner, right? What is the need of your customer? Maybe they need they need a better delivery service. Maybe they need a better communication with, or a better sense of connection with us. What do they need? And when you have that sort of in front of you and you see what your basic needs are and what the other person's or partner basic needs are, then you come up with a number of different ways of solving the problem. For example, again, in the situation with the supplier, you may have a partnership with the supplier where you help them decrease their own cost, offering your own resources, your own expertise, so that you reduce your cost because they reduce their cost, and there is a win-win, right? Versus, okay, I'm going to squeeze 3% price out of you. So I really, and again, this can apply. Another simple example, when I teach presentation skills to, for example, project managers, I ask them to analyze all of their stakeholders and leaders and just write down what are the needs and the concerns that each of them might have, so that you, during the conversation, you would proactively bring them up and say, I understand that you are concerned about timeline here, right? And the person would feel, oh yeah, this person has thought through what I'm needing, and it creates connection and it resonates. And then you have a much more constructive conversation because the person will feel understood. right? So a lot of the work in terms of what to say and to talk about comes from understanding of needs and basically lowering your judgment. So again, when you're going in conversation and you think the other person's an idiot, well, guess what? Likely you're gonna have a conflict. Whilst I want you to understand that this other person has a perspective for whatever reason. It might be because of their fears, must be because of their education or their whatever imperative they have in their own realm, right? So understand the other perspective without judging. Those are very powerful ways of then constructing your message. If I answered the what question, Craig.
Yes, I'm curious your take on that, Alexis. Anything to add? Anything to disagree, or maybe you have a different approach?
No, I totally agree with him. I think it's absolutely right. And probably, very similar kind of approach, especially with things like, working with people on presentations. And exactly, it comes back to that when you can actually start and open up and say, I know you're here because of this, and people feel, oh goodness, this person understands me and understands my situation, then that's a really good start and you're setting expectations. But I guess that there is a very nice concept that there's a sociologist or psychologist called Susan Fiske. She did a lot of work on status. So basically, if you're walking down a street, dark street at nighttime on your own, somebody's walking along towards you, your basic question is this person going to help me or is this person going to hinder me? They're going to let me pass or are they going to stop me and cause trouble? And that is a real basic question that we carry with us into every meeting, every training, every situation. Even when you go into the cinema and you sit to watch a film, right at the beginning, you have that question on your mind. Is this going to be a waste of time or am I going to be entertained? Am I going to get something from this? And I think that's something a question I always pose for people. And then we look at how you can structure what you're delivering to show, to in a way try and maybe disarm people. So maybe it comes back to this violence that Vale was talking about, that it's okay, don't worry, you can trust me. I'm here because I want to help you. What you're doing, what you're communicating, especially in a business sense, is not going to help people. They're not going to listen. If there's not, why should they? And they need to get a sense of that very quickly in the beginning. And that's where classic storytelling structures come in, because they always drew people in very quickly, so people had a feeling of, oh, I'm going to learn something here, or I'm going to be entertained. This is going to be good. I'm going to get something from this. And that's what you want to do. You need to be able to bring people in like that. It's whether you're putting on a theatre show, making a presentation, negotiating with people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm cognizant of the time, and we'll probably take another 5 minutes before we wrap up. But yeah, I hear you. I mean, I did think that it takes time to build rapport with somebody, but I also recognize the power of storytelling to draw someone in, to sort of expedite that relationship, that non-threatening sort of relationship with the person that you're with. But I think it's high time we do sort of a quick wrap up, and perhaps we can go to you, Vale. Any sort of closing remarks with regards to what we've been talking about when it comes to communication, whether it's storytelling, whether it's how we communicate, the body language, nonviolent, anything else you would like to add to close off?
I just want to encourage our audience and anybody to really don't underestimate the impact of the way they communicate, not only in their outside world, but in their inner world. It can literally transform the way you think, the way you function, and your relationships, your connections, and pretty much anything you do. One last insight I would say from a leadership and business perspective, I think one of the key skills in leadership today is to find the right balance between communicating and using efficiently data and facts, as well as needs and feelings, because these are all elements of being human, and particularly feelings and needs are very basic aspects of being a human. And the question for leadership today is, how do you embed in a message a story that is compelling, that is able to connect you with the audience, is able to connect people, and it's interesting and wants to be heard, and it's triggers curiosity and sparkle vision, but also how do you use data in a way that they don't look dry, and in a way that, you know, they again connect well with what's needed, what that sense of belonging we talked about. These are all fundamental aspects of leadership today. So how you use data and facts, and how do you combine this with feelings, needs, and that sense of belonging that's so important for people.
Yes, 100%. The emotional intelligence, the empathy part, for sure, and then the facts, right? The science of it, because we're plagued by all sorts of fake news and mis and discommunication. Alexis, your side, perhaps you can give some closing remarks that could involve a bit of theater philosophy, or the things that you have as a foundation when you communicate.
Okay. I think don't underestimate the power of one. So I think that, you know, whatever you're trying to communicate or whatever, if you can say, I want to talk about time, you've put one thing there. And that's so simple and easy for people to engage with and understand. And so often we overcomplicate everything. And I think that's one thing that, you know, that a good story always starts from one moment, one element, and then it unpacks itself. And I've seen so many conferences with so many leaders speaking, and you don't hear this one thing. And as you go through a speech, you can highlight, I'm talking about this. And it's so useful for people. So I would just say the power of one, and then to unpack it and to talk about why is an extremely, you know, maybe that's something that people can just consider and think about.
Yes, I think you also call it the descriptor, which I do recognize how powerful that is, just to bring everyone in alignment, right? In congruence, which is fascinating. But yes, the time is up. But just to sort of wrap up and mention things that have been covered throughout this very quick 50-minute session, what is clear is that we are all natural storytellers, right? The what and the how when it comes to communication can't really be separated. And when you talk about congruence, that's congruence between the body and the mindset that people have. We heard about nonviolent communication, not to talk with judgments, but to try communicate our feelings, our need, as well as the observation, right? We also then touched on how we can build rapport through storytelling as one of many communication techniques. So on that note, I just want to say thanks to Alexis and Vale for your time today. I trust we added a bit of value to you guys for joining us. So thanks to the audience for your company. And be sure to check us out on social media. We will release some snippets from this video, but of course, we've got lots of initiatives going on, as well as from Alexis and Vale's side. So thanks again, and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.